This module deals with the principles of inclusive pedagogy. The module consists of 3 parts. Part 1 is an introduction to inclusive pedagogy. Part 2 discusses the challenges to the competences of the teacher. Part 3 deals with the methods to deliver inclusive education. What are the basics and values of inclusive education? The first basic assumption of inclusive education is that all students have the right to education and the right to access education that is responsive to their needs. The second basic assumption of inclusive education is that relationships of trust and respect should be developed with all students, regardless of their age, gender, origin, and disability. The third basic assumption of inclusive education is that efforts should be made to know the needs of the pupil and his specific needs, and should be met using a modern teaching methodology. What is inclusive education? Inclusive education is a school project that does not exclude students because of any of their characteristics. It is based on the understanding that all children are provided the support they need for their harmonious and sustainable development. Inclusive education aims to remove all obstacles and barriers that stand in the way of all children learning together. Education prepares specialists in the field of support and guidance of the development of a child with special educational needs, in accordance with its development potential in mainstream education. Inclusive education values the diversity of learners. Differences between students are seen as an advantage and not as an obstacle in working with a group. Inclusive education supports all students. All students have to make progress in their learning. Inclusive education requires a cooperative attitude. This reflects a shared responsibility for the learning outcomes of students, readiness to exchange experiences as a team that solves potential problems, cooperation between teachers as well as cooperation of teachers with parents and with the management staff. Inclusive education requires individual professional development and teachers engaging in the process of lifelong learning as a way to meet the needs of their students. Inclusive education requires individualized teaching practices. How to individualize teaching practices? Get a comprehensive knowledge of the psychophysical abilities of a student. Prepare the class to get students to accept and work with a student with special needs. Develop the organizational skills of the teacher. Introduce changes to the work style of a teacher and introduce innovative solutions. Analyze and adapt the core curriculum to the individual needs and abilities of a student with special needs. Provide specialist and therapeutic classes. Cooperate with parents. Adapt techniques, methods and forms of work to overcome the limitations and dysfunctions of students with special needs. Adapt the pace of work to the psychophysical abilities of the students. Individualize the education process. Enable collaborative learning. Take into account the needs of each student. Which diagnostic criteria are used in inclusive education? First, special educational needs are identified. Then, the educational conditions of instructing students with special educational needs are identified. Finally, to diagnose a learning disability requires knowledge and skills to use reliable tools. A student has special educational needs if he or she has an intellectual disability, visual and hearing impairment, the presence of chronic disease, multiple disabilities, social maladjustment, school failures, adaptation difficulties related to cultural and religious differences, talents, outstanding abilities of students, and any other that may arise in educational situations, temporarily or permanently, including building a focus on the diagnosis of non-specific needs. Diagnosis also includes identifying the needs and conditions of educating students with special educational needs. Finally, to diagnose a learning disability requires knowledge and skills to use reliable tools. Let's now discuss how to overcome the challenges to become an inclusive teacher. Inclusive mainstream schools need to develop individual educational programs as well as individual educational and therapeutic and upbringing programs. This includes formulating goals, determining educational and therapeutic requirements, support areas, program evaluation, monitoring their implementation, and modifying work in a diverse group. Step 1 is identifying a student as possibly needing special education and related services, taking into account their ways of functioning in the class and their environment, such as difficult family situations. This requires good communication skills to build trust, strengthen relationships, and make students feel at ease. Knowledge of different learning styles is essential for inclusive teachers. Teachers need to apply specific strategies to design their classroom to create an appropriate and effective learning environment and for developing an optimal classroom climate for all students. Teachers need to know how to foster positive attitudes towards learning. Knowledge about conventional and non-conventional teaching strategies allow teachers to effectively teach the class. Teachers should know how to apply various organizational forms. Teachers also learn to adapt the curricula and educational content to the needs and abilities of their students. During the course of instruction, teachers create opportunities for students to use multiple practices in developing a particular content. Crucial is developing assessment skills, discerning the abilities of students, maintaining motivation, and building an adequate but also positive self-assessment of students. Of particular importance is cooperation between teachers with specialists, parents, principals, and services of pedagogical supervision. Teachers need to know how to help students who show symptoms of emergent educational and didactic problems and how to develop prophylactic programs and redress. The teacher needs to bring educational programs to life for all students, thereby focusing on the needs of the student, the class, and the school community. Inclusive education methodology recognizes that all pupils have the right to education that is responsive to their special needs. But how is inclusive education delivered in practice? Inclusive education, how to deliver it? Principle 1. Assessment that facilitates opportunities for personalized learning. Assessment aims at supporting the learning process and is done without stigmatizing students or have negative consequences for students. All students should be assessed equal and fair. Clear requirements tailored to the needs and capabilities of students are set. Students are given a sense of security by accepting mistakes, which are treated as an important stage in the learning process. Principle 2. Learning through cooperation with others. This means that students seek to help each other in different ways, with flexible and well thought out division of students into appropriate groups. Inclusion requires teachers to acquire critical knowledge about learning strategies in order to select strategies for the diverse needs of students. Inclusive teachers need the skills to become a guide for the student in their educational process. Inclusive teachers encourage, support, and provide feedback to the students to support and motivate them all. Principle 3. Problem solving based on cooperation with others. This means systematically providing efficient management of activities of students during and after classes. In an inclusive education environment, the teacher cooperates with students and their parents and institutions that can support the teacher in improving work with students with various needs in education. An inclusive education supports the learning process of each student at their individual pace to allow all students to grow and learn. The teacher gets accurate information on the environmental situation of students, the problems of their families, and can actively seek support for students, which over time raises awareness about a positive school culture. Principle 4. Teaching based on cooperation with others. According to this principle, the teacher develops a team system of activities involving the students themselves, their parents, peers, and other teachers. It includes knowledge and practical use of assisted and alternative methods of communication, monitoring the development of students and the effectiveness of their own interactions, flexible approach to teaching, adapting curricula, education content to the needs and capabilities of students. In summary, in inclusive education, special education teachers come into the classroom in mainstream education instead of students with special needs being pulled out of mainstream schools and sent to special schools. Teachers have to be trained how to introduce an inclusive education environment into their classroom. To do so means challenging the status quo and establish goals, how to serve all students equitably, and develop strategies to consider how to design an inclusive learning environment. General education teachers have to work together with specialists to provide instruction in the same learning environment for all students and have to offer additional resources and support to students with special needs in mainstream education. This support should result in academic success and greater academic gains for all students.